Nicholas Lacassi, digital tutorial. He'll show you how to do it, so just watch the tutorial.
Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about how to take your vignettes that you made in Rhino and add materiality and life to them. We're going to be adding people, we're going to be adding materials and textures in the sky to take your rendering from this to this as your final result. You're going to go over to Canvas and open up assignment 2, Photoshop Collage, and you're going to open up this zip file. Once you download that and extract the folders, you're going to open up this. So there's going to be 4 subfolders here that are broken out into the individual things that you can add to your project. In the PDF, you'll find that there's additional links if you want to explore other things and add other people or materials. But there's a good amount of stuff here, and you should be able to just use the things in this folder to achieve a result. So there's a wide variety of people, and you could open up these Photoshop files as well, and there's more people, more groups of people. There's a lot of different textures and materials that you can apply to kind of bring further life to your design. There's a good amount of like greenery and nature, and this file here has a lot of trees and things that you could add, so that might be an interesting possibility. And there's some like sky backgrounds and some skylines, so if you wanted to have your project be in a more urban setting, we have a couple images from a couple cities around the world that you can put in the background of your project. Once you've exported your design, once Photoshop is open, you're going to click File, Open, and then you're going to navigate to where you saved it. So the way I'm working is I have different folders for each of the 3 assignments. You should think about doing that as well to keep yourself organized. And so this is the file that I saved yesterday. So I'm going to open that. So first off, talking about the interface, on the left here, we have a lot of tools that we're going to be using today, like the polygon lasso tool and the magic wand and the crop tool and paintbrush, clone stamp tool. There's going to be a full list of the tools in the PDF that's going to be attached that you should be using. On the right side, we have our color and swatch panel. We have our adjustment layer, and here's your properties. And then below we have the different layers that we're going to be using. So the first thing we need to do is crop this image to a 16:9 ratio so that exporting as a video later will work better. So to do that, we're going to click this button here, which is the crop tool. And then up in the top here, this is asking for the resolution. And so we can scroll down here to where it says 16:9, and it's going to automatically crop to the view. So it kind of depends on your file, whether or not you're going to maybe shift it up and down. And so what I'm doing is I'm holding the left mouse button and I'm dragging this up and down. You can also pull this in and out, and since it's set to that 16:9 ratio, it's going to stay there. So I think I'm going to pull this down a little bit. We have a little more ground here, and maybe a little higher. And I'm going to press enter, and then that's going to crop it to our new artboard size. So in terms of navigation and moving around, to zoom in and out, you don't just use the scroll wheel. You have to hold the Alt key and zoom in and out like that. Once you're zoomed in, if you hold down the space bar, it opens up this little hand when you're holding the space bar, and then you can use that to pan around. But when you're zoomed out and you see the whole artboard, if you hold the hand down and move around, it's not going to do anything because it already thinks that like you don't really need to move around. It's only when you're zoomed in, and then you can kind of pan over. You're going to want to make sure that you save your file often. And so to do that, it's similar to Rhino. you go up to File and you click Save As initially. And so I'm going to save this with today's date. I'm going to say this is 2020-07-19 vignette example file. So let's start with a quick overview on some of the tools that we're going to be using throughout this process. The first one that we should look at is the polygon lasso tool. So a lot of these tools, they have multiple options built into them. So you can hold down some of these and it would pop up other ones, like other lassos in this. So there's a lasso, polygon lasso, and magnetic. So for this, we can just use a polygon. And in this, you can just go and click on stuff and it'll create a boundary. And then once you close it, it'll create that object. And really important to think about with this tool and a lot of the other tools is once you're using them, this interface up here changes. So right now, this one is selected, which means that you can add to selection. But this one, if you select it, it means subtract from selection. And this one is the intersect. So right now, see if you can see that there's a plus mark next to my cursor. So if I continue to click and continue to use the tool, it's going to add to that overall geometry because I have this one selected. But say if I made a mistake and I wanted to remove something, I could click this button here and then delete a portion of it. So that would be like the subtraction part of it. So you can use this to perhaps, if this one's selected, we could go and outline some of these and use those to apply textures later. And so that would make this section selected, and then you can go and like paint or add stuff in there. It's really important when you're working in Photoshop to use different layers, and to make a new layer, you can click these three lines next to layers and then click a new layer, and you can just call it whatever. It's really important that you add names to the layers that we add later in the process, but for now we can just call this working layer because we're just going to be testing and messing around in this layer. So we've gone over the polygon lasso tool, and let's talk about the brush tool. So when you click on it, there'll be a circle on your screen, and the color that comes out relates to this palette here. So if I draw this right now, it's going to do this brush here, but we can adjust the size and the density of the brush using the Alt key. So if you click Alt and right click, so right now I'm holding down the Alt key and the right click button, and if I move side to side, the diameter gets larger and smaller. If I move up and down, the hardness increases from 0 to 100%. So 100% hardness drawn next to this will be a solid line, but a 0% hardness will be like a fuzzy line. This is really helpful later when we're adding filters and stuff, so that you can kind of like calibrate what you want your textures to look like. A really important tool for editing and quickly adding textures to your designs is the magic wand tool. So this tool allows you to select parts of your layer based on what you're clicking. So right now, since this is grayed and there's a box around this, we're in the working layer. So if I use the magic wand tool on this, it's going to create an outline around this. And in the same way as the polygon lasso tool, you can use these buttons to select, to add to your selection or to create a new selection. So if I clicked on this and click the outside, it's going to click on the boundaries of these three lines. So it's really interesting to think about selecting on your base layer and then applying those selections to other layers. So for example, if we turn this off and we wanted to deselect this, you can use the shortcut Control D, and that would unselect. If I could do that again, if I have something selected and I do the shortcut Control D, it unselects. So continuing here, if I have this layer selected, our base layer, which is our background, we can easily select parts of it instead of having to go in to using the polygon lasso tool to say select this box by hand, and like selecting that. Instead, what you can do is you can use the magic wand tool and select inside this box if this layer is on, and then that would automatically select inside that space. So it's really helpful if you make the selection on one layer and you go over to the working layer, and then now you can go in and use the paintbrush to paint inside these areas. And then I can use Control D to unselect. Additionally, with the paintbrush, you can double click on either of these to change your color. So it goes like on a RGB scale, where if you drag this upwards, it's going to go to a lighter color. And then you can use this slider to pick your hue. So as you can see, it's going to change the overall color. If you wanted a dark blue, you would get down to here. If you wanted a light purple, you would kind of drag up over to here. And so you press OK to create it. And then now you can like paint with that color. So we're going to use the polygon lasso tool and the magic wand to better manipulate our objects rather than using like the eraser tool to erase and hide things like this. We can use this button here, which would create a layer mask to our geometry to better work with it. There's two ways to do this. We can first use the magic wand tool to select areas that we would like to remove. So if I click here, this is going to select our sky area, and I can click this button to add to the selection, and I can add this to the selection. And then if I click this button here, it's going to add a mask to it, which is going to cut it out. So what happened here is we've masked the wrong area. Whatever's selected here is going to remain, while anything outside of this dashed boundary is going to be hidden using a layer mask. So we want the opposite. So what we can do is we can go to select and then click inverse, and that would invert the selection, or we can do the shortcut Control Shift I, and that kind of creates the inverse. You can see it up here where the dashed line is changing. Now this is selected, we can click layer mask, and that would hide the other stuff here. This is much better than deleting. We can very easily delete this. Press delete, and I could just use the magic wand tool and then just click the delete button, but then it's just gone forever and we can't get it back. And that's not really the best way to use Photoshop, because you never know what you might need to add later. You might need to adjust something, and it gets really helpful with applying materials to these things, because if you have to adjust the perspective or maybe replace it with another material, you already have it set up. So using a layer masks to use a more constructive way of removal and addition is really helpful. So if we do Control Shift I to invert and do a layer mask, this is removed, and you can see here it's kind of small here, but it's showing like what's masked and what's not. And there's a couple of shortcuts for showing these differently. So if you click Shift and then left click, a red X goes over this and that hides the mask. If you do a Control click, it selects the mask. And then if you do an Alt click, it shows you the mask. So see kind of how it changed, where there's a box around this and you Alt click, there's a box around that. So it's kind of showing you what you're able to work with. And an interesting thing that what you can do with this is you can use the paintbrush. If I click this, it'll go back to black and white. and paint. And if I'm on this layer and I paint, it'll just paint on top of the geometry. Like if I do a big paintbrush here, you can kind of see it. It's dot here. But if you click on this one and you paint, you can also add and subtract parts of it. So I can like paint things away with the black color, and then if I use the white color, I can like add stuff back. And this will be more apparent when we start adding material, but we can modify this with our paintbrushes here and like add and subtract things to the overall geometry. You can see like parts are removed and parts are added based on the color locations that we've added here. So this is a great first step to remove the background of your design, because you can start to add a sky layer or a texture behind your geometry really easily. So to do that, to add some sort of sky, maybe I'll start with this kind of generic sky. Doesn't really have a location. You don't see a horizon. It's really standard, and you can just drag select it in, and it'll place it on top, and also it'll make a new layer here. So right now you can see there's a cross through it and there's dots on the outside. So you can hold the edge and drag it in, and you can drag it from the side. And so right now it's scaling based on the ratio because I'm not selecting anything. I'm just dragging and selecting. But if you wanted to distort it, which for a sky I don't think it's very necessary, you can hold shift and then use it, and then that would change the overall size. I'm gonna undo that. You could also hold alt, and then it would scale from the center point, or you can hold alt and shift and it'll like scale from the center point, but then you can adjust the aspect ratio. So I'm just gonna place it here for now, and it is on a layer, so I could just drag this behind and then it would exist behind the object. Now it's behind, I might just readjust it, maybe make it a little bit bigger. It doesn't have to fill the whole screen because this is more of a collage. I mean, if you want it to, you can make it fill the whole screen. I think it's up to you in the composition. Talk to your TA, see what they think. For me, I think having the sky be on this entire composition is a bit overwhelming, and the end result, I think like having it just in a portion is a little bit better. The next step would be to add materiality to some of these surfaces. In the initial one I made, I added a texture to the ground, some grass to this wall. I added like a little pool here, and then I add this texture on here. I'm not sure what this is, but I just wanted to do it. And I think you can have fun with these textures, open up the folder, and kind of like just try some stuff out and see what works for you. So there's a lot of different stuff here, from concrete to some metal structures, pavers, really wide variety of tiles and textures that you can apply. So I think I'm going to try a different floor texture for this round. So I'm going to go back to here, and then I'm going to drag in this set of tiles. So I don't know if this is going to look better, but it doesn't hurt to try it out. And since we had this one selected before, this is going to appear on top of it. So I can drag this above, and then this would be here. It's really helpful when you're applying these textures to lower the opacity of them so you can kind of see where they go. And so to do that, if you have the layer selected, you can click opacity and bring this down to 50 or wherever. And this might be helpful because maybe you want your textures to not be totally solid and you might leave them like this. But for now, this should be good. So if you look at the examples that the TAs produce, there's kind of two ways to think about the texture. You can just apply the texture flat, like this brick pattern that Jesse added, or you can explore trying to match the perspective a bit more like Valentina made. So for mine, I think I'm going to try to match the perspective. And so the way to do that would be to zoom out a bit, and you can do the keyboard shortcut Control T, and that'll bring up this options here. And so in the same way that we were dragging before to edit these, you can hold the Control key down with them to like warp and manipulate these and stretch the corners. But if you hold Control and Shift, it'll move it on an axis. So this will shift it over. So for this ground plane, we have a back line right here. So I could pull this in and align it there, and then we can zoom out here. I'm holding Control and I'm moving this up. And then I could hold Control here and try to align it to this edge right here. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You can get it close enough. This edge will be a little bit harder because it's falling off the screen. So I'm just going to drag it over so it's like pretty close. And then I'll probably just like scale it up a little bit so that it's going like outside the boundaries. And so that looks pretty good. We can check it by increasing the opacity here. And so in the same way that we used a layer mask to get rid of the background, we can use a layer mask to cut out the area where the ground is to make it different from where the objects are intersecting it. So to do that, we're going to click on this layer so it's selected. We can go over to the magic wand tool, and then we can just click on it. So that will be selecting the area here that's bounded by these lines. And then we can come over to this layer and we can click on it to activate it. And then all we need to do is click this add layer mask, and then it'll crop it to that place. So I can increase the opacity here, and that looks pretty good. I think the red is really bright, but I kind of like the contrast with the blue sky in the background. So I might just lower the opacity a little bit, maybe to 75, so it's not so harsh. And then we'll move on to the next material. So I think the next place I want to add texture is to the underside of this surface and this surface. Maybe you can imagine if like this is the same as this, but they're disconnected over on top of this geometry here. So we can kind of create a relationship between the two by adding the same material to them and start to add to the life of our narrative through that. So going back to the material folder, I really enjoy these textures here with these lines. I mean, they're called metal structure. So let's see if we can add one into how that would look. So I'm going to drag this into here. I'm going to double click to paste it. Then I'm going to lower the opacity at 50%. Then I'm going to do Control T to start editing it. Then for this one, I'm going to scale it down a bit first and try to align this bottom edge. And there isn't really a precise way to do any of this, and it's okay if things are off, but you can hold the Control Shift key and you can flip it up so that it starts to align over here. And again, it's okay to be a little bit imprecise. It's more about the idea behind it than being really precise since this is your first time doing one of these. And I'm going to keep stretching this over so it covers that line. And so zoom in here, and it's not bad. I mean, like you can edit it by holding Control and shifting that, pulling it up, and so that looks pretty good. It's not bad. And then you can go back and do the layer mask by doing the magic wand, and then since this one's selected, I can grab multiple things at once, and then come back to here and then apply this layer mask. Oh, I have to make this one selected. Yeah, that's not bad. I think it looks, that's some really nice texture. I think I'll add a couple more materials and then we'll check back in once these materials are added. I'm gonna add some grass to this platform here. So to kind of break it up a little bit, add some greenery. So I wanted to show that process a bit. It's a little bit different. So if I scale this up a little bit, increase the opacity, not only could we use the magic wand layer mask method to add this face. Like right now that doesn't really look real. It just kind of looks like it's inside a box. So what we can do is kind of remove this line from the background by putting it in front. So if we're on this layer and we flip it over to the add with the paintbrush and we lower this a bit, we could like add some grass that's coming up so it looks like it's kind of spilling out and over. So it looks more real and realistic. When you zoom out, you start to see it popping up a bit more. I might go back and maybe make this a little bit more darker so that it pops up a bit more. And then I might just really lightly have it spill over the front edge in like select places. So it's not super hard lines, and we can go back and we can do that for any layers, but it really works for that. Another really helpful thing to consider is once you've added the layer mask to an object, you can edit it afterwards and keep the mask in the same place. So right now I'm adding this wood texture to the top here. I'm gonna have this bench be partially water and partially wood. So if you click this button here, this unlocks it so you can edit them independently from each other. If I uncheck this and I do Control T, I'm able to edit this independently and the layer mask stays in the same place. So I can go over here and I can align this edge to the line here so I don't have any weird seams, and I can uncheck it. And then now I can relock it and I can go in and click this line here, this using the polygon lasso tool, and I can drag this over and I can use the paintbrush to get rid of this area and have it just be the wood texture only happen there. When I turn that back on and I move it underneath, this bench is now half water, half wood. Another way to edit geometry that you're bringing in, for example, I'm going to add this green wall to this shape. So right now, looking at them next to each other, the one is angled this way and one's angled the other way. So what you can do is if you right click on this, it opens up a lot of other different options for editing. So I can rotate 180, I can warp or skew it, but in this one I can just flip horizontal and that would do it. Another way to do this would be holding Control and then you can like flip it over itself. So here's how it's looking now. I think I wanted to add some sort of tree here to kind of like add to this piece. So what I did was I opened up this file here by double clicking on it, and this is the file that opened. So it's a pretty great tree library that you can go in and pick which one you want by clicking on these and then doing like Control T. Or if you have this move button selected, you can right click on any of them like this one and it'll say Blueberry Elder. So then that's the one I'm going to grab. So now I can just use this tool to drag it in there. So this is how the vignette is turning out. I think the next step is to add some people. I changed the floor. I wasn't really happy with how it looked, so I combined a tile layer, which was this here, with a slight color on top to kind of create this texture. So what I like to do before adding all the people, I like to kind of just like sketch them out on top. So maybe if you wanted to use concept board for this, or you can just use a paintbrush. But I think I would want someone sitting over here, maybe like a kid going down this slide here, maybe a person standing here. Maybe we can get like 2 people walking over here, and then maybe like 1 large person, and then maybe like a second person walking here. So it's kind of similar to what I made before, but kind of like framing it out, thinking about how these people relate to each other and how it generally works. Maybe another person walking this way. Before I add the people in, I think we should clean up the file a bit. Right now we have all these different layers, and it could get messy when we start adding in the people layers too. So to do that, you can select multiple layers by holding Shift. So I'm going to click to the bottom here. These are all of our material layers. Then I can click these 3 lines up right here, and I can click New Group from Layers, and I'll set this to Materials and Textures. So now if we click that, it'll turn off all of our materials and textures. But it seems like I added the background layer to it as well, and you can easily grab things and pull them out. So I'm just going to pull this out to there, and I'm going to bring it below. So as you can see, when you drag something, if it's going to highlight around the blue, it'll go inside the group. But if I just put it right there, it'll stay behind. And now I can turn this off and turn this off, and now we're back to where we started from. So if we head over to the Entourage folder and open up the people subfolder, we can start to think about which people match the different things that I've added here. I can almost imagine this person with the balloon being this person that's standing here. So I can just click and drag it in. And right now, this person is placed below this layer, so I can just drag that over, and then she'd be above the layers. Then I can do a Control T to select her, and then I can kind of position her into place and adjust her so that she works. A really important thing to think about when adding perspective people is aligning their head heights. So if someone's close and someone's far, there should be like a line that runs through all of their heads at the same height. And so I'll illustrate that with just this balloon person. So if I do Control R, that pops up these rulers, and then I can drag a line down to bring a view straight there. So if I'm going to put a person in the foreground and in the background, their heads need to all be aligned to this edge. And so you can set this to wherever based on the scale of your people. I think for this design, I was thinking that this ledge is a second floor. So the space between this line and this line down here would be like around like the size of your house. So I guess you can think about if there was a person standing there, say if there was a person standing right there, we could put the balloon person there, and they were standing right up against that wall, they would probably be around that tall, maybe a little bit shorter. And so if I put this person over here, then that's how tall they would be in relationship to this green wall that's there, like where their feet are on the grid. So I might move this down just a tad for the lines. Then now if I duplicate this layer, just for illustration, and I want to put this person standing like over here, what I would do is I would scale it from here, but then I would also bring it back up so that the head is aligned to the same place. So that like the horizon line is aligned to where their heads are. Because if it's just down here, it looks a little strange, like this person kind of looks really small for their space. So if I scale it up, so it aligns, that proportionally looks a lot better because their heads are aligned. And so you'll see that with this. If I pull this down with all the other figures that I've made, they're all relatively close. I mean, some might be a little bit off because they're sitting or they're walking in the foreground. The only person that would be out of that is this person up here who's on a different level. So I'm gonna add a couple more people and then we'll check back in. So for these two people, this couple and the dog and this hipster looking dude, the map, I wanted to make them both look like they're in the scene more. For this guy, since it's above the perspective and we don't see where his feet are standing, we would need to push him down a little bit and remove basically his ankles and below. So to do that, we can use a layer mask as well by using the polygon lasso tool and sort of trace this line and then go up and then make a boundary around him, and then we can click add a layer mask, and then that'll cut his feet off and make it look like he's standing up there. And the same thing for this couple here. They're walking behind this planter, this water planter here, so we could just trace this line right here and grab that edge, and then also go around them and then make a mask on top of that. And so once we have that, we could unselect this and do Control T, and we can adjust them a bit more. Say if we wanted him to be looking like a little bit lower, a little bit more cut off. But as you can see, if I keep pushing this over, the dog gets cut off. So I can fix that pretty easily by going back to this layer, switching over to white, and then painting back in where that dog was cut off. So it looks a little bit like this. Now that we have all the people in their set locations aligned with the horizon, we should add some sort of effect to them so they don't take away from the view. So we can take them all and put them in a group in the same way we did before. Call this people. We don't want the addition of these people to take away from the architecture and just only be looking at the entourage. The one way that I like to do is go into the filter gallery and kind of mess around. So maybe we can start with this balloon person over here. So if you go to filter and you click here, filter gallery, you can start to mess around with a couple of these. I really like the halftone pattern. It creates like a two-tone image with different lines and creates your texture. And then this blue and the white is based on this blue and the white that you do here. If I press cancel and I make this, say, like a dark gray, and I go back to that filter gallery, the halftone pattern that created is going to be this dark and this dark gray and the blue together. But you can do that kind of for anything. You can go through and look at these filters and explore ways that you can mess around with them. And there's also these sliders here if you wanted to add them. But I would pick one and stick with it for all of them. So not all of them change the color. You go over to artistic, it'll create a watercolor texture and it'll look like the silhouettes are painted. And then you can go in and adjust these sliders to calibrate the different views, and some things will be bad, some things will be good. But it's just good to just mess around and try different things. It's like smudge stick, sponge, underpainting, a lot of different options. Another thing that you can do is you can just make the entourage a solid color. To do that, you're going to apply an effects to it. So if you click this button down, you're going to add a layer style, and you can click color overlay. This will pop up a menu that you can edit and make these changes. In this, you could get crazy and add a stroke to it. And you can, I mean, I wouldn't do it that thick, but you can kind of check these off and do whatever. Maybe if you wanted to do like a white stroke on a pink person, and like alternate like different colors, or you can set this to green and make all your people green. I think I like this green. Okay. And so then that'll create this effects here. If you have one that you're happy with, you can copy it and paste it to other layers. If you hold the Alt key down and drag over to another one, it'll copy those layers over, but you have to drag it over to this box right here. And so this might not work for the things that are farther away. For example, this is just all stroke, but you can go in and double click on that stroke and adjust the size. So if I made this 2 or 1, it would kind of do it. I mean, I don't really like this view anyway. Maybe I would just do solid outline for this. But there's a lot of really interesting effects you can just try out if you're interested. You could add a drop shadow or a pattern overlay, inner shadow. I would just try them out and see which effect you would want to add. If you're not happy with an effect, you can select it and drag it to the trash, and that will remove the effect from the character. So I've added this texture to all of the entourage, and I think what I would want to do is take all the people and lower their opacity, maybe 75%, so you can start to see through them and see what's going on behind them, so they're just representational. Once you're at this point, when you've gone through the entourage and you've added materials, textures, people, and the rest to your project, you can go and add some effects. So if you go and click on adjustments, it brings up a lot of these icons, and if you hover over them, it tells you what they do. You can use these to adjust different components of your design. If you want to increase and decrease brightness of your whole project, you can click the brightness and contrast layer, and it makes a new layer here. It's important to think about where those layers land, because if you move this below, it wouldn't affect the people but just the background. And you can just add a couple of these if you want to adjust the layers. Another thing that you can do is you can open up individual layers and say, oh, I don't like how dark this sky is. So you can go over here and you can add a brightness layer there. And since it's below everything else, you can adjust these layers, and the materials and textures and people that are above will not be affected. Another thing that I wanted to do in this is maybe darken this green wall back here, because it looks a lot brighter than this greenery here. So if I open up the materials and texture layer and I go over to the green wall, which is this layer, and I add a brightness contrast layer, and if I lower the brightness, it's going to darken everything. But if I click this button right here, it says that it'll affect all just the layer below. And so now if I turn this on and off, you can see it's just darkening the layer that it's directly above. So once you're all set and you've added any effects that you want to add all the entourage, I would really quickly just add a background layer. This texture here is saying that there's void beyond, and when you bring that into After Effects, it'll turn black. So what you can do is you can make a rectangle by clicking this and dragging that. So it's just covering the whole background, and it's going to cover it because it's in front of the sky, but you can drag that behind. And now that the fill here is set to white and the stroke is set to none with that line through it, then you should have a white background. So this is how it's going to look when you export it as a JPEG and set it up like that. Once you have everything set, I would go and delete any layers that you're not using because it'll complicate things later. And I would make sure to be saving your file, but just save it when you're done. And then you can click File, Save As. And if you click this Save As file type, you can change this to JPEG. And then you can just save it as that. I don't usually change anything here. Keep the quality at 12, maximum, matte none. Usually this should pop up as is, but just check these settings. Press OK. And then now it should have saved as a JPEG that you can open up. You'll upload this to Concept Board and you'll work on your narrative for day 3.